These people are totally adapted to this way of life. Most of them spend their whole life on the water. A few kilometres down the track, they come across young Buffalo Bill casually riding along the roadside. This is corn-growing country in the middle of harvest. An overloaded trailer is bogged down with a broken axle. As Andre knew these people, he asked the boys to help them. They were invited to stay the night and they accepted. It sure was an experience. Victor had a quick look around. There was a kitchen, washroom and pig pen, all in the one room. But Victor thought that was great, as the pigs were close to the bedrooms, so no one could tell who was snoring the loudest during the night. The next morning, a couple of unusual carts arrived to pick up the corn. Many of the village women gathered to help with the husking. Victor pitched in to give them a hand. It brought back memories for both Ty and Victor, as they had both husked corn as youngsters. Although Victor grew up in Hungary, the method of corn husking was exactly the same. By mid-morning, they were on their way again. They passed these mountain people carrying 40 to 50 kilo baskets of bamboo shoots on their backs, 25 kilometres down to the village markets. At the end of the day, if they're lucky, they might make $5 per basket. As they continued down the winding road towards the coast, suddenly there was a loud explosion and the transit van skidded all over the road, coming to a sudden halt at the edge of a small ravine.
It's very rusty and broke.
They were lucky they didn't go over the cliff. This man offered to tow them into town with his buffalo cart. With a tyre change, they were on their way again. This is the last corn-growing village. From here on, it's rice-growing country, lush and green as far as the eye can see. And there are hundreds of rice growers busy in the fields while their cattle graze nearby. Finally, they make it to the coastal village of Long Hai. Despite the rough, dangerous and narrow roads, which possibly haven't been maintained properly since before the war. A quick stop to chat to the boys catching frogs in the rice fields, a delicacy in Vietnam. This Catholic church stands on the edge of the property that Andre once owned. The vehicle barely makes it through this narrow track, which leads down to some grass huts on the beach, where some of Andre's old orphans now live. The vehicle is unable to go any further, so they transferred Ty and Andre to their wheelchairs and continued the rest of the way on foot. Down by the beach, Ty meets An Mui, an old friend he hasn't seen in 20 years. They lived and taught classes together at the Sancta Maria orphanage in Saigon. As a baby, Chi Mui's mother abandoned her on a tropical ant nest to die. As a result, she lost an eye and her body was badly scarred. She was saved by Andre's grandmother and has recovered well thanks to Andre's kindness and care. An and his wife Chi live in this grass hut on the beach with their 9 children. An Mui is very surprised as Andre proudly tells him that Ty also has a son back in Australia. The family happily showed Ty around the property. They show him the spot where once stood several buildings and a chapel that Andre built as a holiday place for all his orphans and a retirement village for the elderly and disabled, now all laying in ruins. It saddened Ty to see such senseless destruction. This place, in its glory, was a happy place for all that ever stayed here. Long Hai is one of the few fishing villages that uses these unique basket boats. It takes a lot of experience to handle these basket boats. Ty remembers playing in this freshwater river which runs along the whole property and is used for irrigation. Andre watches the ladies preparing lunch, baby octopus, shellfish and other seafood freshly caught by some young orphans. After a delicious lunch, it was time to leave. Andre and Ty feel a deep sadness in leaving this beautiful place behind. After saying farewell to all their old friends, they board the transit van for their next destination, the Mekong Delta, a good day's drive away. Piggybacking, Vietnamese style. On the way to the Mekong, a quick stop at the famous Cu Chi tunnels. A secret trapdoor covered by leaves. A typical VC uniform. Ty and Victor explore the tunnel systems. Underground command post, conference room. Many tunnels contain hidden traps, like this one.
Secretary. But the commander slept somewhere else. Not here. Then move bed.
Yeah.
And in the most comfortable pillow.
Oh, very comfortable, I can see.
The underground kitchen. A salute to the general for a job well done. Here they're travelling on the last stretch of good road before they reach the Mekong Delta, where the roads are very rugged, narrow and subject to constant flooding. Everyone was excited as they crossed the first waterway to the Mekong Delta. There are hundreds of waterways, rivers and channels that crisscross this region, contributing to the survival of hundreds of villages along their banks. The jungle thickens along the roadside as they travel deeper into the delta. Modern technology is rapidly taking over this area, but the humble oxen and the buffalo still play a major part in the survival of these people. This man ploughs rice paddies all day long, with his son following behind, catching frogs and crabs. A bit further down the road, they stop to watch the villagers thrashing the rice. Not so long ago, it was all thrashed by hand. Today, it's all done by machines. It's not a very pleasant job, we're told, as everybody was itching. As they travelled on, Victor was amazed to see rice drying along the roadside. The village kids explained to Victor that throughout Vietnam, it's a common practice to dry rice along the roadside. Being higher ground, it's usually drier. A quick handshake with the Ho Chi Minh look-alike. It's interesting travelling along these roads, as there's always something happening. Andre and Ty are getting excited as they're getting closer to the island of Cu La Gian. This is the first major crossing over the Mekong River, which consists of 9 major branches flowing through the delta. Throughout Southeast Asia, it is known as the River of the 9 Dragons. Once the vehicle was loaded onto the barge, they head downriver, encountering many canoes and interesting villages on the way. Finally, they disembarked at a little village on the opposite side of the river. Then they followed the road downstream to locate a small village where Andre is confident they can catch a barge to the island of Cu La Gian, which is situated between the fork of 2 river branches. They were told it could be dangerous to go to the Mekong Delta in the rainy season, and the boys sure found out why. It poured buckets and buckets, but Ty had waited over 30 years to revisit Cu La Gian and wasn't going to allow a little rain to stop him. At the next village, they discovered they were on the wrong part of the river. They were told Cu La Gian was on another branch of the Mekong. Poor old Andre told Ty and Victor that it was 15 years since he's been to Coolajin, and the changes in the region had confused him. They spent the night in the village, and next morning they caught a barge to another village across the second branch of the river. After travelling for several hours, they came into an old village harbour with hundreds of boats and canoes. At this village, they disembark and leave the transit van with a family in the village. For a few dollars, they'll take good care of it until they return in a few days. Here they transfer to a smaller barge to take them to their final destination, the island of Coolajin. After loading the passengers and goods, they head upriver, stopping at villages along the way to drop off passengers and pick up goods. Andre points to the island and tells Ty that they've arrived at Coolajin, the place where he found him in 1958. The barge lands on the bank of the island and everybody disembarks. Ty can hardly believe that after so many years he's actually made it back. It's a dream come true. They enter the mission through the large steel gates and start to walk towards the main building. They were stopped in their tracks by a nun working in the garden who demanded to know who they were and what they wanted. Once Andre explained who he was, her attitude changed toward them, and she politely told the visitors to continue through to the mission. The news of Andre's arrival spread fast throughout the mission. The Mother Superior and many of the nuns gathered around Andre to welcome him once again to Coolajin. Andre's long absence from this place has not changed the admiration and the love that these nuns have for him. They remember him for all the good deeds he has done for them and the thousands of displaced children he has helped through his long involvement with the mission. For the rest of the day, the older nuns could not stop reminiscing about the early days when Andre and his younger brother Ben first came to the mission as relief workers in the late 1940s. They were sad to see a once powerful and energetic man like Andre, now so frail and confined to a wheelchair. He's barely recognised by people who knew him in the past. They settle down for the evening in the cool sitting room. Andre tells the sisters that their main reason for coming to Coolajin is Ty, who was the first orphan he took from this mission 36 years ago, and who has now returned from Australia to retrace his early life. In the dining room, a delicious French-style dinner is served. Freshly baked croissants and rolls, pâtés, avocado salads, fresh fruit and juices, followed by roast pork, duck and snails covered in coconut sauce. Meals like this are prepared only for VIPs. After dinner, Victor tells the orphans a story about how Ty and himself lived with the Aboriginals in the Australian bush. They wanted to hear more about kangaroos before they went to bed. After a few stories, the novices and the orphans retired to their dormitories. Later that evening, Andre donated $500 to the Mother Superior for use in the orphanage, money that Ty and Victor had collected in Australia. One of the older sisters brought out the record book that she'd been keeping for over 50 years. She found an entry in 1952, a Nugent Van T. This was the name given to Ty when he was first brought to the mission. Andre remembered the story told to him by the old fisherman. He said that it all started one evening on the bank of the river when a young mother, unable to care for her son crippled with polio, placed the child in a specially prepared basket and set him adrift on the Mekong, just like Moses was set adrift on the Nile by his mother. Throughout that night, the child in the basket helplessly drifted downriver towards the sea, but fate intervened. The basket became entangled in the reeds on the bank of the island of Kulajian. Early next morning, a fisherman heard the echoes of a baby crying. And searching through the reeds, he found the basket, which by that stage had almost sunk. He took the basket with the child to a Catholic mission on the island. He called out to the sisters through the gates. And they took the child into the mission, where he spent the first 6 or 7 years of his life. Andre and the sisters continued telling Ty his early life story well into the night. One of the sisters brought some old black and white photographs from their archives, dated 1952, showing the only child found in a basket that year, and it was a little boy crippled with polio. The sister said, as far as she can remember, during her time at the mission, there were about 14 babies in baskets rescued from the river. As the sun came up the next morning, the sound of bells echoed through the large hallways. They would have enjoyed sleeping in, but everyone gets up early in the mission. The fresh morning air and the view through every archway was breathtaking. It is hard to imagine how they built these magnificent buildings, now over 130 years old, on the small island in the middle of the Mekong Delta. Victor attempts to ring the bell, but Ty, an experienced bell ringer from way back, gives Victor coaching. The nuns give Andre and Ty some flowers and invite them all to Mass. This nun, following an old tradition, washes her feet before entering the church. The large clamshell holds the holy water. They're all amazed at this extraordinary and beautiful cathedral built by the French during the 1800s. A wholesome breakfast prepared by the young nuns was awaiting them after the Mass. After breakfast, they went to explore the mission grounds, covering several kilometres. The first place they visited was the cemetery. Many of the graves dating back to the 1800s. Some of these older graves contain up to 5 bodies.